Hello, everyone. And now we have the lights. Here is Tatiana Bazzichelli from the Disruption Network Lab. And we are now doing the second panel of our conference, Artivism. That is our conference number 30. And the title of this panel is Fighting Technologies and Systems of Domination. I'm happy to mention the panelists, Derek Curry and Jennifer Gradecki, Yasmine Boudiaf, Tobaron Waxman, and the panel is moderated by Magdalena Tyzlik-Carver. So very happy also to have you here, Magdalena. We know each other as Magda, I don't know what you prefer, but so to properly introduce her, she's a curator, researcher, and theorist, and associate professor of digital communication and culture at Aarhus University. Her current research in the project Fermenting Data focuses on developing participatory methods for data practices beyond big tech extractivism. In her teaching and research, she draws on trans-feminist values and approaches to address who has access to technology and data. She's also associate researcher in the Center of the Study of the Network Image in the London South Bank University. So thank you very much, Magda, for being here. Thank you all. And I leave you now to the panel.
Thank you, Tatiana, for the introduction and for the invitation to moderate this panel. And congratulations to the Disruption Network Lab on the occasion of the 30th edition of this meeting, of the conferences. It's been especially wonderful to engage more closely with the work of all the artists present here, to also who will be talking in the panel. As you know, the title is Fighting Technologies and Systems of Domination. And you will be introduced to three very different experiences and expressions of art and activism, and works that you will see today will probably link also to different genealogies and histories that bring art and activism together. And we already heard a kind of a definition that Laurie gave us what art and activism is, and I think that was very helpful to kind of think about also, and I would like to continue thinking with this definition that talks about, if I may paraphrase you, Larry talks about activism as any action that goes against power, and then art as this kind of method and a process that is able to kind of draw our attention in a particular way. And I think that this is what we will see today in the presentations by our speakers, who I will introduce in a moment, as I will invite each of you to talk about your projects. So I want to offer maybe also three kind of threads to maybe think with at the start, because I'm also an art historian, so I was attracted, when I was looking at your work, I was attracted by formal and material techniques that you use in your projects and your practice at large. And I was especially intrigued by the way in which you activate these different techniques and media as a form of action that is clearly directed towards demystification of these technologies, creating literacy about them or about processes that surround them, and also to kind of changing opportunities that are available or that seem available, but also kind of wanting to perhaps influence something beyond just kind of action, but influence something that goes a little bit further, I think. And perhaps we can talk about it later. As a researcher, I was especially interested in the way the kind of the three different projects that will be presented here exemplify artistic expression and as a method of fighting systems of control and domination on the one hand, and also on the other, how they explore, again, through artistic techniques and methods, these technologies and also bureaucracies that serve as infrastructures for various forms of oppression that perhaps are less visible to us, and how these infrastructures are created and maintained, and also how they affect others. And finally, as a curator, I was interested in how bodies of knowledge and information and data, and of course also bodies, our bodies, or people's bodies, or different kinds of bodies, or material bodies, are subjects and objects of your work, and how you are able to kind of situate them and locate them within your work. So as I said, these are kind of the three different threads that I would like to propose here to start, and maybe we can come back to them in the conversation afterwards. And for now, I'd like to invite our first speakers, Derek Curry and Jennifer Gradecki, who will discuss some of the research-based artworks that specifically engage socio-technical dimensions of technologies, of technological power structures. And as their introduction to their presentation suggested, in the write-up that maybe some of you read on the website, these projects expand debates beyond a limited group of technocratic experts and reflect on the broad social impacts of these systems, from false positives in mass surveillance systems to the algorithmic spread of misinformation and disinformation through content aggregation filters. By creating interactive artworks that replicate corporate and governmental technical systems, including the errors they produce, they allow the public to experience what are typically hidden or inaccessible systems, while foregrounding the capitalist or governmental agendas that produce these technologies. And I'd like to introduce Derek Curry, who is an artist researcher whose work critiques technological power structures using an approach that combines academic research with critical art making. His artworks often reverse engineer or replicate technologies of control. His academic research draws from media theory and the social sciences, while his artistic practice is grounded in tactical media and institutional critique. Curry has exhibited at various venues, including Ars Electronica, 𝗙𝗂𝗏, National Gallery in London, NEMI in Cyprus, Athens Digital Arts Festival, and many others. He holds a PhD in media study from the State University of New York at Buffalo and MFA in new genres from UCLA. He's currently an assistant professor at Northeastern University in Boston. And Jennifer Gradecki is an artist theorist who investigates secretive and specialized socio-technical systems, including financial instruments, data valence technologies, social media, misinformation, and disinformation. Gradecki is presented and exhibited at venues including Ars Electronica, 𝗙𝗏𝗏, National Gallery in London, Athens Digital Arts Festival, Pixel Festival, Media Art Hong Kong. Her research has been published in Leonardo, Big Data and Society, Visual Resources, and Leuven University Press. And her artwork has been funded by Science Gallery, Neon Digital Arts Festival, and Media Futures. And I invite you now to take a stage. Thank you. And let's welcome her.
Yeah, thank you. Jennifer and I are both really excited to be here. So the projects that Jennifer and I have collaborated on since we started working together in 2009 have spanned various topics, including financial instruments, data valence technologies, facial recognition, misinformation, and disinformation. But for this talk, we're going to focus on 3 research-based artworks to do with issues of open source intelligence processing systems, facial recognition systems, and social media disinformation campaigns that are run by state actors. Each of these issues is made possible because of a technological infrastructure which includes assumptions and beliefs which are accepted as legitimate and/or ground truth, sometimes even among the people who are victims of the technology themselves. To make this socio-technical apparatus clear, for each project, we will explain the type of technocratic power, the socio-technical situation, and how the project attempts to reveal the mechanisms of control. This theoretical framework draws heavily from the Frankfurt School's view of technological power, which emphasizes how positivist rationality has an ideological function that supports a power structure. A positivist or technocratic rationality is the same logic that underpins Taylorist scientific management techniques that improve efficiency at the expense of workers' health and well-being, as well as datafication, or the process of converting information about people's identity and behavioral choices into data that can be used to predict and influence behavior. By reducing or conflating all problems, including social problems, with technical problems, authority is effectively transferred to an elite group of technocrats that have the expertise to address the problems on a technical level, thereby eliminating the possibility for any public debate outside of this small group who adhere to a positivistic ontology. People are often aware of the impact of technocratic consciousness, yet they cynically accept its conditions because the technology it's tied to provides them with comforts and entertainment at the same time as it's exploiting them. An example of this is when people, often my students, rationalize their continued use of social media while explaining all the ways which it's making society and their own lives worse. With this in mind, the goal of our projects is not just to critique a technologically mediated situation that could harm specific individuals, but to gesture at the larger power structure that's reproduced and legitimated through an adherence to positivistic epistemologies and well-meaning attempts to correct these situations using the same logic.
We think it's important to note that we're not trying to promote media and technological literacies in the way that the fields of computer science and engineering often do, where people are inculcated into a certain set of assumptions and ultimately learn to conform to the technology. Instead, we want people to understand that there's a fundamental difference between statistical correlation, or how computers quote-unquote recognize things and process information, and how humans comprehend situations. We want to focus on the socio-political impact of technologies and acknowledge that the development of many new AI technologies has created a highly centralized power structure. Focusing on how technologies work only at a technical level restricts meaningful debate and agency to a relatively small number of people with technical competencies that are likely to have the same interests, ontology, and positivist paradigm. We're against technological solutionism, as I think you'll see from our work. And to the extent that we replicate secretive socio-technical systems, our aim is to make them more accessible to the public and to foster critical engagement. We're going to start with the Crowdsourced Intelligence Agency, which was commissioned by Science Gallery Dublin in 2015 and evolved until 2020. The CSIA replicated and displayed some of the known techniques used by intelligence agencies to collect and process open source information. Our OSINT, or Open Source Intelligence System, was created using technical manuals, research reports, academic papers, leaked documents, and Freedom of Information Act files. The project included multiple predictive policing machine learning classifiers and spoofed the form of an intelligence agency. Users could sign up to become CSIA agents and create their own watch list of Twitter accounts for the system to monitor. The project was based on extensive research into surveillance techniques and was the basis for us to write 2 book chapters and an article, and the project was also cited by other scholars, sometimes in fields outside of media art or theory. And the biggest social impact of the project was that it allowed the public to interact with a partial replication of an OSINT system, which is usually inaccessible, and users could experience false positives in the kinds of decisions that analysts have to make. This allowed the public to understand in a visceral way how automated classification involves a variety of judgment calls and is still as much an art as a science. In the CSIA, the technocrats are defense contractors or private surveillance companies, data analytics companies, and to some extent, academic researchers.
The socio-technical situation is one where analysts who operate surveillance systems are given a black-boxed technology and are usually not trained in data science or ethics, so they may not understand why the technology works when it does, or how it might be problematic. In situations of uncertainty, this lack of understanding can lead to a misplaced trust in the technology, especially after experiencing some correct responses. For example, the OSINT system that we created could easily identify posts made by ISIS as a threat, and it could usually label mundane posts as not a threat. But there were cases when it was unclear if the post was a threat, a joke, or a teenager DDoSing someone because they wanted to win a video game. In these gray areas, if the previous results were all obviously threats, this could easily impact the judgment of the analyst, and the CSIA participants could experience this. Next, we'll show an excerpt of the project's informational video to provide more context.
We now know that our social media posts are being read by intelligence agents. We sometimes say that it doesn't matter, that we have nothing to hide, but we don't really know what they're looking for. What's it like to be an intelligence agent and look at what people post? How do you know what someone really meant if you don't know them and you only have 140 characters to go on? What little we do know comes from leaked files, technical manuals, and documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests. And sometimes when the system fails, there's a story in the media, like the 2 British students who were denied entry into the US for threatening to destroy America and dig up Marilyn Monroe. Of course they were joking. Or the trial of the Boston bomber, where there was ample physical evidence linking Sarno to the crime. But the social media evidence presented by the FBI hurt their case. Song lyrics and jokes were presented as threats, and the FBI had thought that a photograph of a mosque in Grozny was Mecca. They didn't even bother to look at a picture of Mecca. Computers running machine learning algorithms can automate this process and label tens of thousands of posts per second. But if there are mistakes in the data used to train the algorithm, those mistakes will simply be replicated. How does the presentation of data affect how an intelligence analyst interprets it? How does metadata change what an intelligence analyst thinks when they see a social media post? What's it like to be on the other side of the screen?
The project has many features, but the one that was the most impactful was the machine learning classifiers that emulated those used in predictive policing applications. The classifiers were trained on different data sets, such as a corpus of tweets made by known terrorist organizations or a corpus of drug cartel tweets. We also included a classifier made from the official accounts of intelligence agencies for contrast, as well as one made from a corpus constructed using ethnographic techniques. The CSIA can also reveal interface bias, where in the context of an OSINT system, keywords, agent reviews, and machine learning predictions can all function the way that labels or captions shape our opinions of images or artworks when they appear alongside them. A problem that we identified in the CSIA, which is common among many machine learning applications, is overfitting. Overfitting is when a data set is too specific to be generalized beyond the training data. In our first data set, it was constructed as part of an exhibition in Dublin, where visitors evaluated over 14,000 tweets made by the followers of Science Gallery Dublin's Twitter account. And we used this as a training corpus, and we named the model the crowdsourced classifier. In the top image, you can see the top vectors for this classifier, and you notice that the fourth one down is Guinness. Since the posts were evaluated in Dublin, our first reaction was that people were perhaps not taking the project seriously and labeling tweets that mentioned beer as suspicious. But when we actually looked at the tweets that contained Guinness that were labeled as suspicious in the dataset, we found that they were referring to Martin McGuinness, who at one point was the second in command of the Irish Republican Army, which was a legitimate threat to the citizens of Dublin. In our writing about the project, we conclude that for the public to have any meaningful oversight, the training data for predictive policing algorithms would need to be opened up for review and debate. With the project, we experimented with different forms of public outreach. The first was an online notification system that would notify someone if a social media post they made was found to be suspicious, but this was quickly banned by Twitter. The images here are from public terminals that were presented in public spaces and art contexts. But the most effective tactic was to algorithmically surveil a captive group prior to a presentation or exhibition so that the audience was looking at the classification of their own data.
Our second project is 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵, which was commissioned by Science Gallery Detroit in 2021 and is still ongoing. 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵 is based on research into facial recognition practices known to be used by law enforcement in the US, where the use of this technology is completely unregulated. Our project specifically addresses a practice that's sometimes called brute forcing, where in the absence of high-quality images of a suspect, agents have been known to use images of a celebrity a suspect was reported to resemble. The 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵 facial recognition algorithm is trained on faces of characters from the 1984 movie Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, for reasons that will become clear in a minute. All matches made by the system are false positives. Again, the most impactful part of the project is that members of the public can interact with a replicated facial recognition system, something that's usually inaccessible, and they can experience how false positives are produced. They see firsthand how easy it is to misrecognize a face, depending on the data used as the input and the data the system is trained on. In 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵, just like the CSIA, the technocrats are defense contractors or private surveillance companies, data analytics companies, and academic researchers. The socio-technical system is also similar to that of the CSIA, where facial recognition systems are black boxed, and the operators are unlikely to have training in how computer vision recognizes a face in an image. The technology is state of the art, and it can return accurate results in a highly controlled laboratory setting. Law enforcement has extensive systems of networked surveillance cameras, so there's the potential for a massive amount of information to be processed. The images produced by surveillance cameras are often low resolution, grainy, or taken from so high up or so far away that they become unusable for facial recognition. The solution for law enforcement has been to substitute forensic sketches, 3D renderings, or images of celebrity doppelgangers for actual images of suspects. Here's a promotional video for 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵, which explains the situation and shows our use of a corporate aesthetic to help deliver a message.
Facial recognition has become a vital tool for law enforcement around the world. But police officers don't often have clear, high-quality images of suspects. Fortunately, the current lack of regulation allows for the use of creative technological solutions. One solution has been brute forcing facial recognition by substituting artist sketches, computer composite images, and even images of celebrity doppelgangers to find a suspect. Savvy law enforcement agents understand that to be effective, you need to also be well-versed in meme culture and cult movies from the 1980s. That's why our algorithm is trained on the faces of characters from the 1984 movie Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. By using this film, we are able to accurately identify members of the anti-law enforcement militia, the Boogaloo Boys, who took their name from the film. Once key members of the Boogaloo movement are identified, social network analysis can then be used to identify other members. Tools such as degree centrality and closeness can reveal how the Boogaloo network operates through a decentralized command and control structure. 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵 is the first facial recognition system that provides a ready-made brute force surveillance solution. Our system can generate hundreds of leads from live video feeds and video footage of protests that Boogaloo Boys were reported to have attended. More suspects lead to more arrests. By maximizing the number of total arrests, the likelihood of apprehending guilty suspects is dramatically increased. Citizen snitches can contribute to the Orwellian surveillance apparatus by uploading photographs to search for suspected Boogaloo Boys among their friends, family, and even themselves. Boudiaf bias, facial recognition by any means necessary.
So the target of our surveillance system is the Boudiaf boys, who are an anti-law enforcement militia that emerged from 4chan meme culture. Their name is derived from a meme based on the 1984 film Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, which was a hastily made sequel to a breakdancing movie that was also made in the same year. Electric Boogaloo came to refer to any terrible sequel and eventually to a sequel of the American Civil War, as in Civil War II Electric Boogaloo. Boogaloo boys see civil war in the United States as inevitable. Boogaloo boys are often characterized by the media as only right-wing, but in actuality they span the left-right divide and have been found at both right and left-wing protests. This and the fact that they're clearly being surveilled by law enforcement made them a good subject for our project. We surveilled videos of Boogaloo boys protesting alongside Black Lives Matter protesters, protesting the building of immigrations and custom enforcement detention centers, as well as pro-gun protests in the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol building. The project helps people experience false positives from a system trained on a biased data set. And in a gallery installation of Boogaloo bias, viewers can interact with live CCTV cameras that use the Breakin' 2 model to see which characters from the film they're identified as. Viewers can see how their character match can sometimes change as they move their head or change facial expressions, which reveals how different angles or lighting can change the results. The program also displays a top match for the day, which often has an accuracy score of 98 or 99%. While this is usually a minor character or an extra in the film, the image of the person and their matched character are usually so similar that it would be very believable if you didn't know that a real match was not possible. And finally, the project's corporate fiction helps to reveal how heavy investment in technological surveillance apparatus that is not useful in some real-world law enforcement situations can create new unforeseen problems. Using an image of anyone other than the specific person you want to identify in a facial recognition system is clearly problematic to people with experience with computer vision and machine learning. But police are accustomed to working from descriptions of suspects when they have incomplete information or poor images, and the metaphor-based technological language used to talk about facial recognition and computer vision obfuscates the fundamental difference between how humans generalize from images or descriptions and the statistical comparison of facial landmarks in computer-based facial recognition.
So the final project that we'll discuss is Epic Sock Puppet Theater, which was created as part of the Media Futures residency, and it won the Artists for Media Prize. It takes the form of an interactive installation where social media posts made by fake accounts as part of disinformation campaigns are read by animatronic sock puppets. The title is a play on the internet slang term sock puppet, which refers to imposter social media accounts created to infiltrate groups, surveil and provoke people, and spread disinformation, as well as Brechtian epic theater, from which the project borrows techniques for the presentation of politically charged content. Sock puppets are actually another dimension of OSINT. Fake accounts are used by state agents, including law enforcement and intelligence agents, to infiltrate targeted groups, to gather intelligence, and the disinformation they disseminate is often in the public domain, even if it's used to mislead people. This first version of the project features a data set of social media posts from the Russian Internet Research Agency's disinformation campaign in the US around 2016. In this project, the technocrats are the social media platform architects, and in this first version of the project, Russian IRA operatives. The technocrats could be expanded to include any state agent engaging in disinformation campaigns. The US military and intelligence agencies are engaging in these campaigns as well. We created a data set of US Central Command sock puppets and are looking for more data sets, so please let us know if you have any leads. The socio-technical situation in this case is characterized by the prevalence and perceived authenticity of social media, which has led many Americans to choose social media as a primary source of information. Russian operatives leveraged this situation to increase polarization and discord among the American public using sock puppet accounts. This effort involved a type of ethnographic research into contentious political and social issues to create social media posts for and against the most divisive topics, as well as promoting pride in or hatred for Black, white, Muslim, queer, and immigrant identities. It's not totally clear how much impact we can attribute to this particular disinformation campaign, but in the US, the intense degree of political polarization has made it hard to have nuanced conversations and consider different points of view. And this is the context we were responding to when we made the project. We could explain how the project helps people become familiar with disinformation tactics, but instead we thought we'd let the puppets explain it themselves.
Epic Sock Puppet Theater is an interactive artwork featuring animatronic sock puppets that speak the words of social media posts from sock puppet accounts that are known to have engaged in disinformation campaigns.
Sock puppets are imposter social media accounts created to infiltrate groups, surveil and provoke people, and spread disinformation.
The project draws from Bertolt Brecht's Epic Theater, which emphasizes audience participation and critical distancing as a technique for political engagement.
Some social media posts featured in the project may be upsetting, so presenting this content in an unexpected or strange way can allow for reflection on the impact of the disinformation, including how people might react if they came across similar posts in their own social media feed.
As audience members scroll through a dataset of social media posts made by fake accounts that are performed by puppets, they'll become familiar with disinformation tactics.
The revelation of a sock puppet account has been found to help targeted members of the public to identify other sock puppet accounts based on the similarity of posts.
The puppet stage is a combination of a classic Punch and Judy puppet theater and a dystopian video game or penny arcade.
The animatronic hands were engineered from scratch and 3D printed. A program syncs the movements of the mouth to the waveform of the spoken audio track, so the project can be quickly adapted to new datasets.
The stage was designed to be transported in a suitcase, so the project is fully portable and is ready to perform in a city near you.
Epic Sock Puppet Theater is based on academic research that found that the revelation of a sock puppet account has helped targeted members of the public identify other sock puppet accounts based on a similarity of posts. As you saw in a previous slide, Russian IRA sock puppets targeted underrepresented and disempowered groups, including Muslim, queer, and Black Americans. In one instance, a popular account on Black Twitter, an African American community on the platform, was revealed to be a sock puppet controlled by the Russian IRA, and members of Black Twitter were then able to accurately identify other sock puppets because they were familiar with the types of posts made by the exposed account. Identifying a sock puppet involves a high degree of reflection and critical skepticism. The congressional investigation into the IRA disinformation campaign and subsequent academic studies on the dataset released found that prominent politicians and celebrities had liked or shared sock puppet disinformation, including Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter. Additionally, some news outlets published stories based only on posts by sock puppet accounts without fact-checking the story's veracity. The goal of the project is to help the public, particularly targeted groups, spend time with the dataset of sock puppet disinformation while maintaining critical distance so that they can become familiar with the disinformation tactics of these campaigns and be able to identify sock puppet accounts when they find them in their own social media feed or read news stories based on sock puppet disinformation. So we wanted to end with some concluding thoughts about what's worked for us and what hasn't. The tactics that have been the most successful for us have been to draw viewers in through interactivity and by making them a part of the experience as much as possible. And using humor or absurdity have helped viewers to be open to content or viewpoints that they may have otherwise been resistant to. But there's also a lot that we want to communicate or have discovered through our research that we can't incorporate into a brief artistic experience. So in some cases, we found it better for those points to be made through academic articles, which are less accessible and require a greater commitment of time and effort, but do allow for more nuanced and substantive explanation. The disadvantage to academic articles is that it, again, restricts the conversation to a relatively small group of experts when a major goal of our work is to expand conversations about forms of technocratic domination to people without specialized training. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this joyful performance. I'd like to now invite Yasmine Boudiaf to give her presentation. Yasmine Boudiaf is an Algerian creative technologist and researcher based in London. She is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and the Ada Lovelace Institute, and was recognized as one of 100 brilliant women in AI ethics in 2022. Her projects interrogate the impact of new technologies on cultural life using anti-colonial approaches. She has received funding and commissions for her projects from Arts Council England, the Alan Turing Institute, universities, and the private sector to develop engaging experiences. Her work has been featured in the Times and in the Evening Standard, and as well as at international conference, and today she is featuring her work here. Thank you, Yasmine.
So much. Hi, everyone. I think we have some feedback. Is it okay? Cool. Yeah, so I'm Yasmine. I'm a researcher, mostly an artist, concerned in the conundrums that arise in the development of new technologies and how those conundrums manifest. I play around with technology in my work, and that means quite often that projects are never really complete. They just kind of go on and on and on. But that's fine, because I'm more concerned with process and thinking. And I look into knowledge production, and I develop work through praxes of solidarity. But fundamentally, I'm an optimist. I think that opening up access to knowledge and lowering barriers to entry to conversations about technology and politics is a way to distribute power. So I'm going to take this. Cool. So I am agnostic as to the tools that I use. They're all technical in some way, but that's a snapshot, and you could see more in my website. The project that I'm going to talk about today is called Entanglements. Entanglements interrogates the relationship between states and technology companies. These relationships are lawful, yet can perpetuate violence towards minoritized groups. It is therefore important that when describing these relationships and their effect on people, to move away from the potentially sanitizing framing of legality versus illegality, and situate these as part of a wider pattern of behavior that keeps replaying across history and geographies, but just in different forms, as part of a continuum of the subjugation of people away from power. The systemic, often unnoticed and seemingly harmless harvesting of individuals' data is weaponized against minoritized groups, enabled through partnerships between government bodies and private technology companies. We've seen tech solutionism, normalizing language, lack of consent, and obfuscation as neo-colonial behaviors of these entities of power, designed to maintain and extend that power. The project seeks to demystify technological concepts and develop a conceptual understanding in people. Collectively, public-private partnerships are interrogated, detangled, and then reimagined in the commons. I focus on the UK context. However, many of UK shenanigans are applicable to other states. The framing that the state bestows on itself is that of a benevolent protecting force that gathers a group of people in nationalistic solidarity. But we mustn't forget that the state is entirely self-serving, employing mechanisms such as criminalization, distributed policing, and tech solutionism, of course. I'm just going to mention a few of these images I've gathered in my tinfoil hat research. So the UK, as well as many other countries, are experiencing a cost of living crisis, and part of that is a huge increase in fuel costs. Recently, I received a pamphlet through my door, which is at the very top left there. And it was advertising automated energy meter readings. And these kind of continuously monitor your energy use and send information to the supplier. The leaflet contained like a couple of ethnic minority families having a nice time in their kitchen. And I thought, oh, this is curious. So I looked into the kind of data sharing agreement of this, like as in what happens to a person's data if they install one of these things. And in the middle there, it says what we do with your data. And I'll just try to read it out that the government agency has the right to share that data with lots of different bodies, including law enforcement agencies, both in the UK and overseas, debt collection agencies, credit reference agencies, etc. It's more likely that people who are poorer will have these sometimes forcibly installed. For example, if they get into debt with an energy company, that energy company may send somebody to your house and physically install one of these. Another example, which isn't a technical example, but is just a really shady shenanigan that the UK did that went unnoticed for a long time, was that the Bank of England was paying reparations to the descendants of people who owned slaves all the way up until 2015 as compensation for their lost property, administered through the Bank of England and, of course, using our public funds. More broadly, a common trait is trapping Global South nations into debt, suing them if they refuse to have their national resources exploited by Western businesses. We learned that civic participation is a big fat lie. For example, the use of freedom of information requests. So I recently was looking into the Metropolitan Police, which is the police force in London, and their use of facial recognition cameras. I found a freedom of information request sent to the Met Police that asked the number of facial recognition cameras in use in London and their locations. The response was that none of our cameras use facial recognition software, but that we collect images of faces and then use software to analyze them, which is a really sassy response. And I think maybe I'll talk about one more. There are even states within states, so it's really hard to define and outline something to even fight against, let alone participate in democratic processes. The City of London exists as almost a principality in London. It's about 1 square mile and is outside of usual regulation. It's owned and managed by a corporation called the Corporation of London. The Mayor of London has no jurisdiction. There's a mayor there that's called the Lord Mayor. It was established in the around 600 years ago by crusaders who wanted to protect their wealth from the king. And so they established this. And even today, the king or the monarch needs to ask permission to enter the City of London. And it's a bizarre situation. They have their own like police force and bin collection and schools and everything else. But they also have the highest concentration of financial corporations in this space governed by a corporation. So again, I'm just trying to emphasize that participating like a good citizen, like, is pointless. Don't do it. I want to be a little bit provocative and talk about some of the underlying mechanisms that feed into these behaviors that exhibit themselves when these relationships are formed between states and private corporation. This is how I kind of try to make sense of the world. White devilishness is commonly known as white supremacy. It transcends skin color, but you can identify it if you know what to look for. Whiteness as a category is unstable. It can be assigned and rescinded. It's not true that white supremacy is only expressed by Caucasians. The most hostile policies against black and brown bodies are currently being enacted by British ministers who look like me. We see a benevolent whiteness being bestowed on Ukrainians. They are just like us, British news outlets said. They have blue eyes and blonde hair. They need our help. The Russians have become less white recently, othered, evil, and irrational. But be warned, appropriating whiteness as protection is a Faustian pact. Whitey will always want something in return, a piece of you that you will never get back. Curls don't regain their shape after years of straightening. Resisting white supremacist logics beyond the individual as communities is vital. You need to be sharp. Shapeshifters infiltrate every aspect of life. I'm not going to describe everywhere I see them, but because that would take a long, long time, but I'd really like to. But I'll mention a couple. Nativism reappears in disguise. In the environmentalist movement, where, again, in the UK context, I see efforts to cull invasive species like the grey squirrel, or the reintroduction of butterfly species by rogue breeders. It seems so innocent, so righteous. But we see the urge to master nature, seeing eugenics as a hobby. I just want to point you to the image on the far left that says UCL and has a black and white picture of a guy with a mustache. At UCL, which is one of the most well-known and prestigious universities in the UK, it's in London, up until 2016, I think he was an associate professor, held an annual eugenics conference that went totally unnoticed by everyone. And for me, and then eventually some students found out about it and wrote a newspaper article about it, and then it was shut down. But for me, it just kind of exemplifies how these behaviors go undetected in institutions, because nobody notices. Eugenicist ideologies spill over into tech and philanthropy too. The world's being imagined and manifested by a handful of individuals with obscene wealth and political influence. An imposed utopia leaving us to question utopia for who? Transhumanism is essentially pushing human evolution down a desirable direction, deconstructing and then reconstructing what was once sacred, embodying the values of corporatization, augmenting, tweaking, refining bodies in the pursuit of productive optimization. It's all vanity. Microdosing, fuel, toxic productivity, longevity, but only for the lucky individual. Desperate for affirmation through aesthetics. It will never be enough. Babe, stop. This has gone too far, you're not well. This rhetoric of "we are making you better, we are making the world better," seen in professional activism and corporate ESG goals, with the expectation of gratitude that comes with it. I say again, the white devil is a shapeshifter. I need to highlight the real heroes that make billionaires' dreams a reality: the professional managerial class, educated at institutions where stale Greco-Roman values are crystallized, hardworking but talentless management consultants justifying the industry, justifying its relevance by never actually solving problems, endless workshops, post-it notes everywhere. Thank you, dear facilitators. Let's put a pin in that and circle back at the retreat. So I'm talking about these social dynamics because they help us make sense of the case studies that I'm about to describe and which we'll play around with if you come to my workshop. IBM is a tech company that has worked with governments around the world for over 100 years. Here we see the mechanism of distributed policing. During the Holocaust, they developed the 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, a proto-computer to keep track of persecuted minorities traveling around the country. During apartheid South Africa, they developed the Book of Life, a system of policing black people, making them easier targets of police violence. Currently, IBM's predictive policing software, licensed to police departments around the world, claims to anticipate crime by analyzing data sets of past crime and surveillance media. This claim has not yet been independently verified. During lockdown, governments gave contracts under a state of emergency without public tender, and the UK was no different. Palantir is known for its analytic services to the US military, as well as surveillance for US border control. At a time when the UK public was under lockdown, a secret contract was given directly to Palantir by UK ministers to develop an analytic platform to track the spread of COVID. The government initially refused to give details of this contract to the public, whose health data was being handed over to this company. After threat of court action, the contract was published, revealing that Palantir charged only £1 for all this work. Now you may be thinking, why are they charging so little? Are they just altruistic? They're the good guys? Or is the real value in harnessing our health data? I should say also they've since won many million pounds of contract to build an NHS foundry that will harness all healthcare data into one platform that they control. And they're likely to win a £360 million tender for that. It's been slowed down because there's been some public outcry, but it does look like they will be successful. Atlas is an immigration processing program currently being rolled out, ostensibly to make the processing of asylum seekers more streamlined, saving time and money for border enforcement. By now, it should have replaced the 23-year-old case information database, but the Atlas system has implementation delays. A National Audit Office report reveals that, far from alleviating administrative burdens, officers were having to do double the labor, putting in data first into the old system and then into the new system. This new system, recommended by major consulting firms, costs the public tens of millions of pounds. The interface that you could see on the right is the old system, and as terrible as it is, it somehow still works better than this brand new solution that is costing lots and lots of money. The final case study is a company that's a good example of how a technology used for good without us noticing can be weaponized to harm. Buddy watches are worn by elderly people and give a signal to carer if, like, an old person falls over or has an accident and they need some help. Their public marketing is very wholesome. There when you fail. Or is it fall? No, fall. Sorry. There when you fall. Oh, and also I should mention that to much celebration, this company was founded by a woman. Taking a look at the public sector contracts awarded gives a very different picture to what the marketing would suggest. Amongst the healthcare devices, we can see ankle bracelets that monitor movement, used on people recently released from prison to track their whereabouts. This stuff does not make their Twitter feed. They were also recently awarded a £6 million contract to provide watches which asylum seekers would be forced to wear and have their pictures taken periodically. This was meant to have been rolled out last year in the autumn, but there's been no update on that. For artistic interventions that undermine oppressive logics, that confront absurdity with absurdity, acknowledging the futility of state-sanctioned civic participation. There is value in world building, whether as collectives or in the imaginary. Art in the public uniquely occupies a space in the public imagination. It does not require measurable outcomes or impact assessments. It's a direct relationship. The art accesses spaces that is usually the monopoly of property owners, of the powerful. It is an invitation to contribute to a wider conversation, whether it's about human rights or tech regulation. There is room for imperfection, for playfulness, for mistakes, and for us to grow and challenge ourselves. I particularly love humor and satire in art. Aside from making some difficult topics easier to confront, it reminds us of the joy that other people bring into our lives. And it reminds us that it's these connections are what we are ultimately fighting for. I just want to shout out Darren Cullen and Hamza Hassan. And I wish I could credit some of the memes, but I've looked online and I couldn't. And cool, that's it from me. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Yasmine. It's really interesting to hear your presentation also after your earlier presentation, because I think it shows how you address in such different way but such similar kind of issues. And what I really liked in yours is the use of humor and the shape-shifting white devil being there as well, but also the oppressive logics that kind of turn into oppressive logistics and that infrastructure. But we'll come back to a conversation about it in a moment, because now we have our final speaker for the panel before we move on to conversation. And it is Tobaron Waxman, who will talk about his project, Gender Diasporist. Tobaron is a visual artist who sings. Tobaron composes performances for photograph, video, and site-specific installation, and is also a trained vocalist in Jewish liturgical music. Up to today, Tobaron has collected numerous series of curatorial relational and live art, and socio-political projects, and exhibited in prestigious venues worldwide. In 2013, Tobaron founded the Intergenerational LGBT Artist Residency as a combined curatorial, relational, live art, and socio-political praxis. Since 2017, Tobaron has developed the trans collections at Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives as part of collaborative team at the largest independent LGBTQ archive in the world. But today he will talk about a particular project that is happening also in very closer to here, just across the border and beyond. Thank you, Tobaron.
Hab vergessen, allerliebste, hab verlost mein eigen Haus, hab dem Jam sich abgegeben, trag mich Jam zu Mutterschoß. Und du, meine Windgetreier, treib mein Schiff zu jenem Breck, was mein Herz mit Adler Fliegel sucht schon lang zu mir weg, was mein Herz mit Adler Fliegel sucht schon lang zu mir weg. Thank you. Here are some excerpts of gender diasporist video stills, song excerpts, libretto excerpts, as well as images from my collected research materials. And I'll share with you what are the goals of this project, despite pragmatic barriers, have been. I am so grateful to Tatiana and Disruption Network and Magda and all the fantastic speakers today. I'm very moved. It's an honor to be invited to share space and thoughts with such innovative theorists and artists. I'm grateful to learn with you. I've been invited to expose some of my project, Gender Diasporist, which to a certain extent takes place in Poland, as Magda was pointing to, in that the project unfolds to expose an example of ways in which the state determines the parameters of the body, especially for those of us presumed to have a uterus. This is an image on the screen from Gender Diasporist of my mother's family passport, which they managed to acquire with great difficulty in order to escape Poland on the last ship permitted to leave in 1939. You can see the baby is my mother, and below the baby, you see the date, May 23, and the port of Gdynia. To lay some groundwork, I have to explain to you the nature of what is called gender confirmation law in Poland. I took a train to Gdynia to see the place where the ship left from. And you might be asking yourself, since I'm out as a trans person and this project has to do with bureaucracy and paperwork that trans people struggle to acquire, what does any of this have to do with transsexuality? Usually, the expectation of so-called trans art is supposed to be the story of my uterus, or how I came out to my parents, or some other chimerical, magical makeover narrative, which has its place but really doesn't interest me. I'm a lot more interested in non-binary thought, and what we learn from transsexual knowledge about power, liberation, and the sublime. And that's inevitably what Gender Diasporist points out in creating new opportunities for coalition. So, are there any Polish speakers here today? Okay, so be gentle with me. And are there any American children? Be warned, I'm going to be reading to you. There are 3 genders for nouns in Polish grammar, correct? There are exactly 2 sexes for Polish persons, and no concept of gender beyond this. In other words, while science shows us a spectrum of gender expressions and a range of sexualities in fauna, Polish law ignores this, Polish language refuses this, and a growing population misconstrues this as a plot to dismantle social order maintained by the state and the Polish Catholic Church. On the screen is an image from video for Gender Diasporist. It's one of my favorite stills so far, which I recorded at Gdynia, which was previously the port of departure for sea voyages and is now a very popular vacation spot. This was the place, as I mentioned, from where the ship that my mother, her sister, and their parents escaped Poland on the now infamous last ship permitted to leave, the MS Batory. 2 ships reached Halifax in Canada. 1 ship was turned back as part of the no Jews as part of the none is too many policy for Jewish immigration. The Batory, however, was permitted to dock. The date stamped on the Shapiro passport is May 23, which is the date on which Hitler introduced to his generals the Lebensraum project. So whenever I return to Europe, I try to enter through Poland on May 23 in order that my passport is stamped with the same day each time. May 23 has become a motif to work with in the art-making practices of the research that goes into the Gender Diasporist project. My mother would say, actually yesterday, for the first time, meine Mutter hat mir gesagt, a so viel Sachen von mir legen auf so ein 5 as is scary. So many things of mine add up to 5 that it's scary. Hast heint die alle 3 Sachen. Mai ist der 5. Chodesh und 2 und 3 ist 5. Ich bin geboren in 1938. 3 von 8 ist 5. Verstehst? Too bad. But I digress. When you're born in Poland, your gender is determined by a trio of people who are not you. Rather, they are the natal parent. Do people know what I mean by that? People usually say mother. But I'm trying to contribute to starting a trend. The natal parent, get it? Trans men also get pregnant. Cool. The natal parent, the doctor who facilitated the birth, and the clerk who filled out the form. This primary document functions as a certification of the birth, and the information on it is copy-pasted into everything else you're ever going to do in your life. So when you reach legal age, and you need to sign a contract, buy a car, rent an apartment, the name and sex on that primary document are fundamental. So if there comes a point when you realize, I'm trans, I need health care, and I need to change my name from a typical Polish, typically gendered name I was given at birth to the name of my choosing, the Polish language and the Catholic choice of names being what they are, you are by default positioned to have to change your birth certificate. Now that trio of people who completed the primary document in the first place, the doctor is long gone. Who knows where the clerk is? But you still know who your mother is. So you have to take your mother to court and sue your parents for the so-called mistake. For those who are listening at home, I made air quotes with my fingers around the word mistake. For the so-called mistake they made on a government document. Feel free to laugh. We must laugh. If your mother recognizes and respects you as the expert on your own life, you still have to do the court case, but it might be short. If, however, your mother disagrees, your court case can go on and on and on. And if your mother is no longer on the terrestrial plane, the court puts a clerk, like a stunt double, in her place, and you still have to do the court case. Breng mich nur 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗁, nach dem fliehe sich zurück. Grüßen sollst du allerliebste und erzähl sehr von mein Glück. Und du, mein Windgetreier, treib mein Schiff zu 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗁, was mein Herz mit edler Fliegel sucht schon lang zu mir weg. Was mein Herz mit edler Fliegel sucht schon lang zu mir weg. In Poland, as in many other European countries, citizenship is determined via jus sanguinis, blood ties. In other words, a death legacy having bled on the land. This is, of course, the upside down of the colonial project, in which those persons who have already bled on the land are not considered citizens of the new occupying nation. Rather, the colonizer arrives on the land and doesn't consider those who are of the land to be citizens of that new country. Where should a Jew live? I could be a settler in Canada or a settler in Israel. What if I chose neither? So I met with Polish trans activists in Warsaw and Krakow, asking if applying for a Polish birth certificate as an out trans person with mixed gender ID could present a stumbling block or jeopardize your work in any way, please tell me and I will abandon this project immediately. But if you think it could be an asset to your work and perhaps bring more attention to your activism or bring more support, could we please collaborate? The leadership of the trans NGO agreed and introduced me to the Office of the Ombudsman, also known as the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights of Warsaw. We began to prepare a legal case proposing that I have the right via jus sanguinis to citizenship of Poland, which is preceded by a birth certificate as a person of Polish Jewish heritage, now that Jews are permitted to return on such grounds, since the Polish Citizenship Act became law in August of 2012. Polish citizenship acquisition is quite detailed, by the way, and very complicated, and it has its own Wikipedia page. I recommend it. It's a fun read. And it's also a shortcut through which to understand the history of Europe, in that the borders of Poland have at different times included lands from Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary. I'm very interested in notions of citizenship, ethnicity, origins, and the laws imposed to limit or control mobility by prescribing these categories in order to maintain national purity. Here is on the screen another video still from Gender Diasporist, in which I'm walking between the cinema, the passport office, and the memorial to the ghetto wall, considering queer trans futurity and the psychogeographies of Warsaw. My Canadian birth certificate has an F. In my case, and I'm specifying because each trans person is different, as is their right in a gender diaspora, such as ours, in my case, the F is not entirely accurate, nor is it entirely inaccurate, but it doesn't matter. I have over 3 decades of female experience. I am forever standing on the shoulders of my matrilineal line, strong women who face tremendous changes, such as a sea voyage to a rock farm on the tundra with babies. My female birth certificate is one of the last documents I have, and keeping it is my personal choice as a gesture of allegiance. I never changed my name, and Canada doesn't require anything of me in this regard. So for the court case in Poland, our legal argument was the Polish government has no right to tell someone to return to their place of birth and change their documents. If the Polish Passport Authority were, in light of this, to concede to making my Polish documents with an M, my case would have set a legal precedent such that any gender variant person in Poland might not ever have to sue their parents again. One month ago, I arrived in Warsaw and immediately got new passport photos and headed right for the passport office, which turned out to be not a straight line, like most things. I want to officially say that the people working in the passport office were very kind and sincere. They were genuinely concerned that my documents should be what they call in alignment, the assumption that transsexuality aspires to assimilate and reify a heteronormative gender binary. I kept reassuring them that that was not necessary, but they were very firm about it. Finally, on May 26, because it took at least 3 days to go to all the different offices that they sent me to, I submitted my application for a passport. They requested a notarized translation into Polish of a handwritten note from me explaining how I got a male Canadian passport. So it's a short note in which I explained that approximately 23 years ago, I submitted a passport application with my photo and fee to the Canadian Passport Authority. Punkt. I think this is only half the number chits. And the ink, or the, what is it called, the carbon on the numbers that you have to take out is slowly fading away. And all of these chits are becoming blanched. But I'm going to keep them as part of the archive of this whole situation. In the note, I offered a compromise and have an F on my Polish passport. It seems to me that no matter what they do, they are creating transsexual knowledge with me in spite of themselves. A Polish citizen is entitled to a passport. However, they have to decide how to either accept or deny this citizen's right to a passport, either a female passport with this face, or a male passport in spite of a female birth certificate, having never done the court case of suing my parents, creating, in effect, some kind of non-binary document. They may simply deny my right to a passport because of what they call non-aligned documents. I have a lot of privilege to travel. And when I travel to Poland, I bring 2 huge suitcases. One with my gear, and the other full of drugs. Testosterone, syringes, painkillers, abortion pills. I have masculinity, I have whiteness, I have a Canadian passport. What else is it for? Thank you. As I travel, however, I have a lot of "where are you from" type conversations. And here is an excerpt of a dialogue from the libretto for gender diasporists. This is from my first visit to Poland in a taxi in Warsaw. I'll be playing myself and the narrator and the taxi driver. So please be gentle. So my first visit to Poland in a taxi in Warsaw. After a lengthy conversation about how the left wants to make the society weak. Weak? The opposite of strong. The communists say to us every day, "Remember, you are anti-Semite." He asked me, "Where are you from?" I asked him to guess. Israel, UK, He said he couldn't place my accent. And we both burst into laughter when I said, I have the Skype operator accent, the accent of no place Europe. He said, if I want to say I know like the Jewish, I know like Israel, the atheists say anti-Semite. It is the silent cow, like in India, the silent cow. I explained to him, sacred. The sacred cow is very loud. And we laughed. So I asked, the church wants you to be strong, but the atheist wants you to be weak. But the Vatican also tells you to remember the anti-Semitism. He said something about how the Vatican is different from the Polish Church. Whereupon he turned around, while driving, to scan me more closely. You have the Muslim beard we see everywhere now. I breathed in the oxygen one knows one needs before pronouncing something never said out loud before. What the Kabbalists know as an enactment becoming material, pulling atoms from the ether into the physical world. I am wearing my mother's father's ring. I heard my hormonally altered vocal cords exhale. I'm Polish. Abracadabra notwithstanding, the place names I've recited so many times this week feel like glass beads in a flea market. They catch my eyes, but I would never pick up. Białystok, Sandomierz, Ożarów, and Zelva, which is now in Belarus. He turned around again and scanned the length of my body with new attention to detail. Polish? I saw his eyes linger on my midsection, below which I don't look typical. In the quick save that all transreal know, grabbing my stomach, I blurted out, "Is this the right size for Polish?" We both laughed again, and he agreed, "Is Polish, is Polish." Thank you.
Thank you, Tobaron. Thank you for starting with the song and finishing with a story. We have now some time for a conversation, and in the meantime, I want to invite everyone to think about their questions that you would like to ask the speakers today. There is also we will also probably take some questions from online audience as well. I kind of don't know where to start now. I had a few questions prepared, and I think one thing that struck me in all the presentations was how, and also especially in yours, how differently you engage your audiences in your work, and how much that actually sort of I see in that kind of part of the art that you introduce beyond obviously the kind of various formal media that you use in making the projects. So for example, I mean, what you were saying, Tobaron, about making the knowledge together about how to treat diasporic transsexual body, right? How to think with so many intersecting identities or personhood, and how the officials might respond to that if they want to accommodate that for various reasons, right? I'm thinking, Yasmine, about your work and how you bring that into your workshops, how you bring these kind of minute discoveries that then take you on a path of actually finding out and discovering this knowledge that is part of the sort of everyday fabric in the examples that you gave, everyday fabric of life of London citizens or people living in UK, and how you bring them in the workshops that you produce and that you will do on Sunday. And also I'm thinking about your kind of theater, different theater activities, which also have a genealogy, right? You worked with people like Steve Kurtz, and obviously in his critical ensemble theater, there is this particular electronic disturbance theaters. There is this particular engagement of audiences into activities and actions that are produced, the kind of situations that are generated. And maybe I'll start with a question for you. What was interesting to me to see was that you not only sort of focus on the way in which algorithms are part of these processes, but actually how people who operate within the system where these algorithms are, how also this becomes part of the experience that you invite audience to kind of take into account. So really working with that connection between social and technological that was present, I guess, in the 90s and early 20s in a particular way, and now I think we need to rediscover it in a different way because of these new technologies that are with us. So I'd like you to maybe expand a little bit on that relation of social technological in your practice.
Yeah, so this is something we think about a lot, and we've been thinking about it as almost like a resurgence of like modernism, where there is, for a long time, there was no belief in an absolute, and there was no like meta-narrative, it's all micro-narratives, and that sort of, I don't know, went out of vogue, or I'm not sure how to explain what happened exactly, but I think it coincides with the rise of new models like transformers and neural networks that are a lot more accurate at doing certain type of analytic predictions than previous models were, and that way they're a lot more useful. There's also a lot more data that's being produced and easily accessible and machine readable because of the internet, and so I'm not sure if I have like an exact answer to your question, but I think all of that is like sort of coming together in a way that's ushering in like a new modernist paradigm that's going to need to be addressed, because it's obviously creating not the exact same problems, but similar types of problems that the first wave of modernism brought.
Yeah, I also definitely would position our work coming out of institutional critique and tactical media, and one of the I think influences is 𝗙𝗫𝗏, this idea of making do. So we, have these systems and we want to be able to engage with them. They're typically very secretive and obscure and actually really abstract for people. So grounding a small part usually of one of these complex socio-technical systems into an interactive experience really, I think, helps to demystify it, as you said earlier. And I think the institutional critique dimension is that we're actually working from within these technologies and using them. And so I think that's, we're not necessarily adding anything to that, but really just kind of keeping those traditions alive and continuing them, because I think they're still really relevant today for activist and critical technical practices.
And Yasmine, I was... First of all, I wanted to ask you about this use of figures that you have. They are very evocative, obviously, and they actually are immediately quite helpful in sort of not only mapping, but actually just naming the fact that these powers act in a very particular way, right? And they are able to change and adapt to kind of the new, that they are actually quite resistant, right? So I wonder how do you use them actually? How do you use them in the context of the workshop, or in the context of the, how is that actually applied to I guess you might be doing that on Sunday, so I don't know if you want to share that with us now, but I was curious if you could say...
Do you mean numeric figures or like characters of...
I think the relation between the two, the characters, and then how that's mapped onto a particular case study as the...
Yeah, sure. So I use them as anchor points to evoke first a little bit of interest, but also a little bit of rage, just to evoke some sort of emotion. And then if a person is interested enough, then I offer more and more information and build up a story. I think I use those because we are natural storytellers, and I think our brains respond to a good story and something that is evocative. I also think that I don't have the right to impose or overload like a bunch of information in the form of data or like a policy paper on somebody unless they are curious enough to seek it. So yeah, I use these as anchor points where that kind of offers a very low and accessible level of understanding that I hope as many people as possible could gather around. And then, if they want, we build together and we interrogate together and we find out more. It's important to me to be understood, firstly because it's lonely, like making art by yourself for yourself, but also I don't want to fall into the trap of just speaking a language that policymakers and tech companies understand, because in a way you end up honoring these logics that I think we're all trying to resist. So I'm very careful about messaging, figuration, and always try to be as responsive as possible to my audience, which I consider as members of my community.
Thank you. And Tobaron, I think I'm struck also by the richness of the journey that you are on, obviously, with trying to gain Polish passport, which becomes this major work, really, and that also leads you to various people, to various communities and various situations that are official, more or less official, that are kind of encounters with strangers like the taxi man, right, where it's possible to interrogate perhaps certain ideas about what Polishness is, or what Polish people or certain people who represent Poland or are Polish think about what that kind of personhood, how that personhood might be envisaged or exist in the mind of the typical Polish person, who I am too. But I'm really thinking about this journey of establishing one's kind of personhood, this kind of identity that is no longer just defined by either gender or ethnicity or color, but actually becomes this sort of potluck of everything, right? Like suddenly all these things are being addressed. So gender and ethnicity, etc., right? And I wonder how you are bringing all this knowledge together? Are you bringing this knowledge together into a particular form of an archive, or of, I mean, it exists through your performances, it exists through filing in documents, it exists through conversations with activists and others. And I wonder if you gather this together, and if you think that is also part of the project that you're doing.
I'm going to answer the question that I think you asked, if that's okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah, the goal was not about getting a passport. The goal was about creating a legal precedent that was going to facilitate some justice for a whole bunch of other people, and that includes not just trans people, but anyone who comes up against these theocratically imposed binaries. And there are a broad array of scenarios where that happens. It's not just about being trans, or whatever people presume that might be. And by exposing that, there's an opportunity for a coalition. So during the research period, by which I mean artistic research, where, I mean, for those who are listening who are not visual artists, I mean, you take your materials and work with them in different ways and see what resonates in a way that is legible and delivers what your intentions were, or exposes new intentions. So I've taken some of this material and worked with dancers to make choreography. I've taken some of this material to make recipes. I've developed a series of inks from gynandrous plants that grow where my mother's mother was from, and then wrote messages, a series of postcard works of architecture that can no longer exist because an area was Russified, as well as previously destroyed during the Second World War, and of course deforested. So I've found all this information that couldn't have been communicated directly by my own relatives or by their paperwork per se, even though the paperwork itself has a lot of pathos to it and is very beautiful. I mean, I have the privilege to find it beautiful from my current circumstances. So yes, there's a nice, big, juicy archive of materials, but the point really was to work within the local, with locals, because I have the privilege to leave. So last summer I worked with some queer people. We did a kind of devised theater method of making a performance score and some choreography, for example. And next week, as I showed in my last slide, we'll find out what kind of closure I have to the paperwork process, and that will then also determine how this information could be applied. Does that answer your question?
Yes, the one that I asked, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. We have, I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. While people are thinking, I think I want to go back to that comment that, I mean, I think Tatiana really wonderfully curated this panel, and with also with this particular focus on bodies and how bodies function within your work. And they do in a very different way. And I'd like you maybe to say something about that. What are the bodies? What kind of bodies? What they are made of? Or what do they do? What is their function in your work?
So I think there's several different types of bodies in our work, and one of them, of course, is bodies of knowledge and this kind of technocratic consciousness, this understanding of these technical systems. But then, of course, also data bodies or data shadows are a big part of it, and helping people to understand, again, small parts of that, because it is really difficult to work with things like data bodies. Another dimension of it is, because our work is interactive, it really intends to be, and we've referred to it previously as a visceral heuristic. So there's kind of a shorthand, very physical way of engaging with something that's typically hard to understand, maybe too technical, and can make it more engaging. Again, also to help diffuse difficult content, there's this element of humor. And all of those are, I think, really felt in the work in this visceral way.
Yeah, we could go on, but yeah, I do think the important thing is that people are experiencing it with their own bodies, with their own data, and that's been really effective, because a lot of times you see like marginalized people are usually the first to experience these problems, but they exist beyond just those specific populations to a lesser degree, and it doesn't usually cause as much harm. But when people can experience it for themselves and see the types of decisions that are made for them, or classifications that are put onto them, they can maybe see it from other people's perspectives as well.
Yeah, so I think that bodies are figured depending on what lens is used, and constituted and reconstituted, and constantly shifting depending on who is powerful enough to set the parameters of what is. I'm also inspired by kind of 𝗙𝗶𝗴𝗵𝗁 feminism, and that the idea that people aren't necessarily disabled, but it's a disabling world, and trying to kind of switch the lens a little bit and say that and stop talking so much about this body is experiencing racism, but rather that body is doing white supremacy. And I think playing with, who gets to define what, and trying to invert it, convert it, play around with it, challenge it, subvert it, satirize it, challenge it legally, is really exciting. And in that process, like completely new, previously unimagined possibilities can arise for bodies. Us as individuals, but like as a body politic as well.
Tobaron, would you like to sing? There is a question over there.
Yeah, my question is for Tobaron. Where can we find out the updates on your case next week? Is there... You have some online presence where we can follow here what the outcome is?
Such a strange, disembodied way to have a conversation.
I'm over here.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you all for the talk. But Tobaron, your story is amazing. I really I need to know what happens next.
Thank you very much. But I have to say, it's not my story. It's this Catholic. Okay, scratch that. Erase that. It's this theocratic trap. And I figured out a way to be a wrench in it, but that's not necessarily my destiny for myself, you know? So we'll have to see. There's, how can I say this? How do I say this in a nice way? It's not my objective to be someone from North America who swoops in with what they think someone else needs, like as a hobby or call it an art practice. Rather, let the locals who are there determine what they need and tell me whether or not I'm allowed to participate in them achieving what they need for themselves. So Gender Diasporist began as a collaboration with the people who would have been in direct, what's the word for that? Directly recipient of the results of our labor. But since then, you know, Duda was elected a second time. A significant chunk of the activism that was done, the major gender bill was vetoed. And the legal landscape is just not the same as what it was when we started. And in a way, I have this in common with any visual artist who starts with some materials, and as things shift and change, whether it's your own health or your financial circumstances or what kind of studio you have access to, the situation changes and it changes the shape of your work. So I have to decide what is still useful to this project, because I'm not interested in aestheticizing this horrendous injustice that I have the privilege to walk away from. So at minimum, when I have the opportunity to talk with you and see what kind of familiar resonances it has, it reminds you of something that you've already endured or something from your own country. And then people start to be aware that it's not just a trans thing, or maybe that a trans thing is ours and not just for a very specific demographic, but is like a shared interest. In Poland, people use a rainbow flag in ways that nobody I know does in Toronto, for example. In Toronto, a lot of LGBT people see the rainbow flag as a commodified thing, or it's kitsch, and it doesn't represent us because of that commodification. Whereas in Poland, anyone who feels silenced feels affinity with the rainbow flag. And if you have a rainbow bumper sticker on your car, you are taking a risk that your windows will be smashed in. Poles? See? So, I hope I haven't strayed too far. How are you going to find out? Send me an email. Let's keep in touch.
There is a question from the audience online. Yes?
So there are 3 questions, one for each speaker. Okay, group of speaker, and there is also one for one comment for Tobaron. This was very moving. Your speech. The audience online is saying that thank you. This is very moving, and so I start with the question for Tobaron. How can the transsexual knowledge of the people overcome state boundaries and bureaucracies? Okay.
I'm not really a rabbi, but I play one on surveillance camera. I think it has everything to do with coalition building and sharing access. What my colleague referenced in terms of 𝗏 activism, disability activism, and specifically what some people call 𝗏𝗏 feminism. The idea that we are in circumstances that create these demographics of disempowerment, rather than seeing, that individual as having a singular, as being an embodiment of a problem. So that's such a huge, vast question that involves many people and many layers that I don't even begin to know. But it's something that I'm glad I had the opportunity to even touch upon today. I think that everybody did. I mean, I think that we did that collaboratively. It's not just about,
Thank you. I go to another question for, this is for Derek and Jennifer. Is it of importance for you to create artworks that has an aesthetic impact on the viewer? Does beauty has a role? Does beauty have a role?
Well, it's interesting. I think my first impulse is to think of beauty as a way to draw the viewer in, as a potential tactic, and maybe even as a way to keep people, hold their interest when you're dealing with something that is, I don't know, usually not aestheticized.
Yeah, our starting point is more coming out of like an avant-garde lineage. Like Courbet would draw people into paintings to make a point about class, and situationists and tactical media artists would appropriate institutional aesthetics to communicate specific things. So I guess that being said, when we look at our work over the past 6-7 years, we realized we do have a particular aesthetic that is emerging, which interestingly enough is not like part of our lives at all. Like our house doesn't look like our projects or anything like that. So I guess to succinctly answer the question, I would say beauty has a role if it can be instrumentalized for the point we're trying to make. Otherwise, we might take it or leave it.
Thank you. I do the third question from the online audience is for Yasmine, which is there anything you can extra share with us concerning your method of research, like platform or techniques you use to get through government or private companies' documents? As information normally.
So first of all, I've never done anything illegal in my entire life. I'll just say that, full stop. But the thing is, I think part of my practice means, it's important for me that whatever I do, I feel like anybody else can do relatively cheaply or for free. So I tend to use fully open source software and open databases, freedom of information requests. All the research that I have gathered for the case studies are publicly available. I think it's more of a personality trait or a personality defect that I enjoy the process of deep dives and interrogating and kind of deep research. But yeah, it's all mostly, well, it's entirely open databases and open source software where possible. You know, as Tobaron said, like, I also do artistic research where I, you know, would take an artifact and put it into the world and see how the world reacts with it. I believe in showing my process as I go along rather than the final product, and getting, you know, responses from people that I care about, like my community and audiences. In terms of technique, I do my best to describe my process, and if the software that I use, I also like publish as well. Yeah, and it's all just, I'm very grateful for, you know, whistleblowers and for people who contribute to the open source community. And I watch a lot of YouTube videos to learn things as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. I think this is all time that we have today. Thank you all for staying with us till this late hour. I want to also invite you to thank with me our speakers, Derek Curry, Jennifer Gradecki, Yasmine Boudiaf, and Tobaron Waxman. And I want to invite Tatiana on the stage.
Also, a big thank from my side, and I think from the whole audience, as you saw. And thank you, Magda, that you interpret so well what sometimes I have in my mind in combining unexpectedly presentations together. So thanks, it was really great work you also did, and thank everyone. And I just ask for 1 minute more on this stage from you. Although it's very hot, as we can see, just to introduce what is happening tomorrow. And so tomorrow, no, actually first I wanted to say something else that I mentioned already before, because there was a great question at the previous panel about the combination between AI and weapons, and also, in a sense, the idea of fighting technology of domination. And so in September this year, we are launching what we call the Disruption Network Institute, that is investigating the Kill Cloud. That was also a chapter we had in our Whistleblowing for Change book that was written from Lisa Ling and Sean Westmoreland. So our idea is to combine the discourse of information warfare, autonomous weapon, and AI. And we will start with 3 fellows that you see there. One is indeed Lisa Ling, that is a whistleblower, and she was part of the US drone program. Jack Paulson, that is the director of Tech Inquiry. And then Naomi Colvin, that is the program director of Blueprint for Free Speech. So with them, we will work 1 year to actually investigate more in depth the Kill Cloud. And we are also planning to launch the results next year at another conference in September. There will be other conferences in between, but this will be 1 year work and potentially more, because we also think that is in this moment of war and conflicts, we really need also to understand how the weapons are developed, and especially the ones that are called killing robots. So we will work on that. And we are also very happy to say that we have whistleblowers as researchers. That is also not a combination that is often done. So we think is that very important. And so tomorrow, instead, we start earlier at 3:30. We have a very interesting combination of topics between the video of Giacomo Verde, The Little Diary of Ailments, to then a panel that is about also Italian Artivism with really great groups like the Superazione Collective, the Data Boom Collective, and Guido Segni, that is a very interesting activist from Italy. And after that, we have the keynote with the Yes Man and Cornelia Solfranc, and a panel that we will have then to conclude this event with still this poster, Michelle Tyzlik and the White Orso Collective, that is moderated by Natalia Ivanova-Maut, and this is about also, in a sense, a straight line from this panel, but more into the idea of how art and social change can be combined, and also how we can subvertise the codes of monopoly, corporations, and a form of domination as well through artistic practice. And I conclude also to say that we have this workshops program on Sunday that we already mentioned, so please remember to subscribe to them. It's still possible to do. There are still spaces. Yasmine just mentioned her workshop, in which there are also still spaces, so you can just go on disruptionlab.org/tickets and get your reservation. Please do it. And then we will have also other workshops in the morning. You can check our website for more information, because I already spoke about this very in detail at the start. And I think we all want to go to eat now and relax. So thank you so much again, and thank you for this great panel, and see you tomorrow.